Meet The Lot, native token of Lukki Exchange and the most potential tool for investing this year. Trade now on P2B, B2B and Lukki.io.
Good evening. Very nice to be here. I spent many years of my high school and university years in the United States competing in competitive speech and debate. So it's really nice to be at the Union for an opportunity to talk about truth. And that's what I want to spend a few minutes speaking with you about today before Dr. Wright talks to you about much more advanced things. Because in reality, Bitcoin is really about truth, and it's not something people really think about. So I want to explain to you three things today. Why Bitcoin was born for truth, how Bitcoin's history has devolved from that truth to things that you probably don't realize, and finally, how we, with Craig and our team at nChain and many partners around the world, are trying to bring back truth to Bitcoin in the form of Bitcoin SV and its true Satoshi vision. So what's the truth about Bitcoin? So Bitcoin was birthed to the world just over 10 years ago with the publication of the famed Satoshi white paper, which introduced to the world the concept of Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So people really think about Bitcoin as a new form of money, and it is, and it certainly will be. But if you get down deeper, what Bitcoin really is a way to create truth through data ledgers. The Bitcoin blockchain, that's all it is. It is a data ledger, a way of recording transactions and providing it in an open, public, and transparent manner so that no one person, no one bank, no one government can control money. And because of that power, the Bitcoin blockchain can be used for many other things. It can be used to power a whole new world of data transactions for smart contracts, these things called tokens, Internet of Things, communications and devices, all kinds of micropayments, and many things we at nChain, which is the leading global research and development business in blockchain technology, are working on. But Bitcoin's blockchain has never been allowed to actually achieve that full function. And that's what I want to really hone in on today, because if Bitcoin was designed to bring, as Craig says all the time, light to the world, the truth of data transactions, what happened to it? If we're really honest with ourselves, 10 years into Bitcoin's history, Bitcoin has never flourished into this dream of a worldwide global peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Our vision is 5 billion people across the world using Bitcoin on a daily basis. The world's major enterprises using Bitcoin and its blockchain as the global enterprise data ledger. And that hasn't happened. And it didn't happen because of a control of what is perceived to be the truth. A certain developer group, the Bitcoin Core developer group, took control of the Bitcoin blockchain many years ago and limited its scalability and size and growth. Bitcoin's blockchain works by collecting approximately every 10 minutes transactions that are happening on the network to be added to a block of data that continues the chain. And so Bitcoin's blockchain, for certain reasons in the beginning, limited that block size to 1 megabyte. That's very small. That's about the size of a JPEG image file if I were to take a picture of you all here and send it to you by Snapchat or on Facebook. And that only fits a relatively small number of transactions. So you cannot scale the Bitcoin blockchain to rival Visa and MasterCard payment speeds if you keep the block small at 1 megabyte, because you can only average maybe about 7 transactions a second in that small of a block, compared to Visa and MasterCard, which are doing daily averages of 12,000 transactions a second and higher during peak holiday shopping seasons. So why is that? It's because of ulterior motives by certain forces in the Bitcoin world, which decided we are going to create a private company, which is called Blockstream, as well as a company that provides something called the Lightning Network. And instead of allowing Bitcoin to grow, to become this global data ledger of truth, we're going to change its whole system from what it was born to be in that white paper and move transactions off of the chain. Instead, we're going to create this second layer payment network called the Lightning Network. And that's where all the fast transactions are going to happen, not on this magic thing called the blockchain. And of course, Blockstream and the companies promoting it have proprietary interests in this payment network. And that totally changed what Bitcoin was meant to be. And because of that, there's been this civil war that's been happening in Bitcoin's community for many years, why some people are saying, hey, you cannot allow Bitcoin to stay stuck at 1 megabyte. We want the blocks to be big. We believe in a future where Bitcoin's blockchain can process all this data. And then there's the other camps who say, no, we need to keep the blocks small and push the transactions off the chain to this thing called the Lightning Network, which in our view changes totally what Bitcoin was meant to be, compromises the security of the chain, and undermines the search for truth that's in that Bitcoin white paper. And that's what led to fights in Bitcoin and why it has never really grown to be the global payment system. And then in August of 2017, a certain contingent of Bitcoin decided to split off in a fork that received a lot of news. It birthed a new variant of Bitcoin called Bitcoin Cash, which started to proceed to move to bigger blocks to keep transaction speeds fast, transaction fees low, and make this the world's new money. And for a period of time, we supported that community as well until this past year we realized they as well were deviating from the vision of Bitcoin that was birthed in that white paper. And that's why we and some of our partners fought the world's first Bitcoin hash war last November for control of that chain. It led to a split off of the chain, and we have now emerged with a different chain and token, which is called Bitcoin SV. And it may seem new, but in reality, it's continuing the original Bitcoin blockchain that began with the Genesis block in January of 2009. Our mission is very simple. We are restoring the original vision of Bitcoin. We are taking the protocol and code back to its very beginning state, Satoshi client version 0.1, released in 2008 and 2009. Because we believe that the Bitcoin protocol in original design has everything it needs to do anything all of these other blockchain projects claim to be able to do, Ethereum, EOS, Dash, Monero. There's far too many blockchain projects in the world. There's far too many cryptocurrencies. Just like the world operates on a single global public internet, our vision is the world operates on a single global public ledger, where the truth of information, title changing of property from one hand to another, the custody of goods and supply chain management is all tracked out in the open on a single source of truth, which is the Bitcoin blockchain ledger. We're moving to much bigger scaling. In addition to restoring the Bitcoin protocol and keeping it stable, instead of 1 megabyte blocks, which are on old Bitcoin, Bitcoin Core, or Bitcoin Cash, which is at 32 megabytes, our default block size on Bitcoin SV is 128 megabytes currently, which allows processing of far more transactions than the other chains do. And later this year in July, our development team is increasing that default block size to 2 gigabytes. That's 2,000 megabytes, which would allow processing of transaction speed of easily 14,000 transactions of payments a second and would surpass Visa and MasterCard levels. But our vision is much bigger than that. It's one day, this man believes in a world of terabyte-sized blocks in the Bitcoin blockchain. That is 1 million megabytes. And what that means is we achieve a network of that scale that we could be processing billions of transactions easily, quickly, cheaply, and powering all of the data of the world. Craig unveiled last December a very groundbreaking project and concept called the MetaNet, because he has devised techniques for how the Bitcoin blockchain can power and subsume the entire internet and combine the functions of money, for which it was originally conceived in the public mind, with information in one native transaction so that micropayments of all kinds can happen. Maybe the social interactions you have on social media, instead of watching advertisements for them, you earn small amounts of Bitcoin from advertisers for sharing a picture of a product you like and having your friends like and comment and share on it. Instead of having Facebook sell your data, you start controlling access to your data and earning money from it in small Bitcoin micropayments. This is the world we believe in, but it's a world that's been derailed because of social engineering. There's huge camps out there in Bitcoin. If you watch the message boards or Twitter, which has become very toxic, Twitterverse, people attack Craig. They attack this vision of a big block universe for the Bitcoin blockchain with things that are just flat out false. And it's been an unfortunate truth that truth has been hidden in the Bitcoin world. And that is why we have taken a stand to fight for this original vision of Bitcoin. We have brought it back in the form of Bitcoin SV, which stands for Satoshi Vision. We are working with partners and colleagues all around the world. We've made some exciting development in technology. We've announced a number of key investments with us and our partners, Calvin Ayre and the CoinGeek Mining Group. And it is our belief that one day, just like we operate on an internet and we don't really think about how the underlying backbone works, your world and your future generations' worlds will operate with a single global public blockchain that you won't really see. You won't really have to know how it operates, but will transform the world by a lot more decentralized applications, powerful technologies, and combining the power of information and money on a global public blockchain that is all about tracking truth. And we are excited to talk with you tonight about this journey and how all of you in your professional journeys might join us in this future of the blockchain of truth.
I worked out that what I can do is I understand finance and I understand money and I understood security and IT. So one of the things I don't talk about and haven't till now, and it's up there, but what I didn't ever tell people about was I am that pariah because I had all my friends in Silicon Valley and whatever else. So what I would do is I was a trustee and member of Uniting Church in Australia. I was on the church board. I was on the financial services board. I helped run and manage the church. I did things like ensuring money got to Uniting Burnside because I had a single mother. And that was the charity I cared about. I cared that they had enough money because what I see is not Christian or Muhammad or Buddha or whatever else. I don't really care. I think people should believe in something, in a world, in an honest world, in an open world, in an embracing world. And we can only do that through stewardship. My church was a Wesleyan church. It's the same church that robber barons like Andrew Carnegie actually had. And he's called a robber baron, but he built over 1,000 libraries. He built universities. He changed the world. He did that because he controlled what he did, not because he was doing what he was told he should do. And Seneca told us that trees that build themselves and grow and have strong roots because they're on the side of somewhere like a hill, they build deep roots. And the force of storms force them to grow. And I haven't wanted to do that, but I have to. Because those trees, those ones that are on, sort of in the middle of a forest, they're the ones that don't ever experience hardship. And because of that, their roots don't go deep. Their branches don't grow. And they're brittle and they're fragile. And that's what I've learned I've had to become, something other than brittle and fragile. Because we have a world and a system that is brittle and fragile. Why? Because no one knows what's happening. Our financial system is built on a system of not knowing what's there. We don't know what the money is. Bitcoin's not anti-bank. It's about knowing what's in those banks. The singularity of the railway changed the world. Nobody saw beyond the railways. The singularity of the telegraph changed the world. Nobody predicted what a world with an Atlantic cable would be. The singularity of every major changes, and we as humans grow and adapt and become something more. But here's the point. We as humans, the question is, what world do we want to live in? What world do we want? I don't want a world run by numbers. I don't want a world where people controlled by machines do what they're told by machines. I want a world where we record so that we can hold accountable our fellows, so that people know what's in a bank, so that they know what's in their government. Cicero wrote that the blood, the sweat, the toil, the cost of war is printed on infinite money. And that's what we have in society. If we have money that we can print without ever coming back to something, then there's always a cost. We need to be able to hold accountable people for doing what they're promising to do. ICOs are nothing new. Back in the 90s, we had web IPOs, we had Usenet penny shares, we had all of these things we're seeing now happened before. And the same things happened before. Blockchain changes this. Bitcoin does. Not because it allows these things to exist, but for the first time, it has a record. The thing that no one thought about is that there is a record of every ICO, of every trade. This is where lightnings come to exist, because after Silk Road, people wanted to lose records. The creation of all these other projects is to break Bitcoin. Bitcoin has an immutable evidence trail, logs that show things that exist forever. That changes surveillance too. We've got a world where people take the easy way. The NSA just scans email headers and phones and whatever else. Because 9/11, if you thought about it for a minute, if real intelligence work actually happened, then someone would have said, why are these group of people learning how to fly jets but not how to land? I mean, that's a question people would have asked in the 70s. And we don't anymore. So now we believe if we scan phone records, we'll find people before. Usually what happens is we get to look back and go, haha, that's why they did it. I don't want a world where something goes wrong and we say, why? I want to be able to see what's happening and trace the money when things are going wrong before they go wrong. I want a world where old-fashioned policing can happen and people can start actually knowing the people in their community and people can actually think people matter, not numbers. So that's why Bitcoin exists. Not so that we can have scams and pumps and exchanges that record everything internally, then lose them and disappear, so that we could start recording interactions between people. And here's the thing, if everyone's doing this, the economics don't allow surveillance of everyone. Even things like drugs. Only the big guys get taken down because there are too many people doing the small things. So that changes the nature of the world. If we can start holding people accountable for what they do, it changes the world. If we want a world that we want you guys, for your children when they come, to live in, we have to be accountable. That's what stewardship's about. That's what the word means. So that's my vision. I want a world where people can be private, can live their life, and be safe. And how they do that is they can interact with people. Not because machines are going to run us all. And yes, I'm a techie. I've got more certifications in the past than any person ever in a variety of different areas. I had over 100 certifications from Cisco to Juniper to all the SANS ones, etc. And yet, one thing I'll tell you, people matter more. Thank you.
Sort of moving away from why Satoshi is not specifically Nick, but that there are a lot of people who claim to have evidence that you are not Satoshi. How do you reconcile your claim?
I'm sorry, I don't see any evidence. I see hearsay. I see people making things up. I hear an endless, an email from someone else said something, but it must be you. This is why court.
Let me address this. You know, there was an interesting incident that happened just this last week on the Reddit boards, which I stay off of because they are quite toxic, but you know, a lot of the crypto community love these Reddit boards. So a number of years ago, there was a Reddit user that goes by the handle Contrarian, because nobody uses their real names on these Reddit boards, who started a whole massive online campaign, essentially against Craig. You know, constantly saying negative things about him, saying he's not Satoshi, saying he's a fraud, and leaking documents which Craig, you know, establishes are, you know, manufactured and fabricated. But he or she or it got a lot of credibility on these message boards. For many years, people have rumored that this is also Greg Maxwell, who's the chief technology officer of Blockstream, one of the companies behind kind of the other camp of Bitcoin that opposes our vision of Bitcoin. Well, just this past week, there was an incident where Contrarian ended up posting the identical comment on a thread with what is known to be Greg Maxwell's account. And it led a lot of people in the Bitcoin Twitter sphere or Reddit sphere to say, aha, This is just indication that it's him running two accounts and they're talking to each other as part of the social engineering campaign to make it seem like a lot of people are discrediting Craig, when it's really the same person talking to themselves to create the illusion that all these people agree that it's not Craig in terms of him being Satoshi. And so I give that example because it's kind of leaked out into the online sphere to indicate what I said in my speech is about how we're trying to really establish truth. While people come out and say, I have evidence, Craig is not this, or he's a fraud about this, it's very easy to manufacture evidence. And at the end of the day, no one person knows who invented Bitcoin other than the person who invented Bitcoin.
So following on from what you mentioned about Twitter, you have taken legal action against many in the Bitcoin community for comments that they've made about you. So most recently, Twitter user Hoblonot has been targeted
We
and
haven't
asked...
taken legal action yet, we're taking
legal action, apologies, and asked to issue an apology stating, I was wrong to allege Craig Wright fraudulently claimed to be Satoshi. I accept he is Satoshi. I'm sorry, Dr. Wright. I will not repeat this libel. As Satoshi continues to be referred to as an unknown miner in all mainstream media, do you think it's reasonable to ask him to make a claim that's not currently accepted by most people in the community?
What community, sorry? I mean, what you're talking about are a group of trolls and social engineered forums. The average person doesn't even know much about Bitcoin yet. I went to present a legal paper about digital signatures, and basically practically no one even knew anything about Bitcoin yet. They'd heard a little bit about this blockchain thing, and that's it. Your average person, your average judge, your average lawyer doesn't know what Bitcoin is. We're a very small community. You pick one of those books and that's the Bitcoin community and the rest of the world.
But despite that, in most articles talking about Satoshi and within the small Bitcoin community, it is acknowledged that Satoshi is still unknown.
No, once again, those articles, the ones like CCN, which are paid opposition, the ones owned by the people backing Blockstream. You mean all of the social media owned by a group of people who are backing alt chains, who are backing multiple coins, who are backing unregistered, unlicensed, uncontrolled exchanges. All of the people who are saying we need Lightning and side chains because we need to be able to, well, basically lose records.
A lot of the media in this world, the sources, the platforms have their own agenda. So you have to start learning to filter the truth or shaded truth or non-truth of what's published through the agendas of the different platforms. And that's hard to understand when you don't work in the field because you're just reading things, and we're used to saying reading things going, oh, that must be true because someone says something. But you know, I come from America, so I've got a president who always claims about fake news all the time. So I know, you look at things and it's just because it's printed doesn't necessarily mean it's true or not. And I think that's the hardest thing for people not working in the space to start to understand, because some news site says it's true, therefore it must be true, when all of the crypto sites have, most of them have some agenda one way or the other.
And they reference themselves. So you get circular things. Someone said I'm a fraud, so they reference the article saying that, and then it goes round in a circle, and they each reference where they each said the same thing.
My point wasn't actually about how what the news websites are saying is the truth. It was more about how not specifically websites funded by your opposition, but I read an article this morning from Forbes, which just claimed that...
Which is an opinion piece. It's a paid opinion piece by Kyle Thorpe, right? Who's basically
not a journalist.
Actually employed by these other people. He's not a journalist.
That's what I mean. Go back and reread that. It's an op-ed opinion piece that you can pay for placement on Forbes, but because it's on Forbes, people think it's a journalist saying something that they have investigated as true. It's an opinion piece which cites a prior opinion piece from Forbes.
Despite that, I think my main point is that whenever there's not an op-ed piece, but an article, just a factual article about not specifically you, but about Bitcoin, they refer to the creator of Bitcoin as unknown and not as you. So I'm just
are getting sloppy. There's not many good reporters anymore. They're sloppy. They don't check. They just want a quick sort of bang for the buck. You don't have the newspapers or anything like that you used to. There are a lot of bloggers now. It's quick pieces, and journalism isn't what it used to be.
So for a number of years, Satoshi did disappear from the Bitcoin world. that happened in 2011, and it's been the internet's biggest mystery for a long time, who is Satoshi Nakamoto. And for reasons we won't talk about here, Craig chose to be private about his history in Bitcoin. As you might imagine, this has an impact on one's family and one's personal life, and for various reasons he chose to be private about it. For various reasons that have emerged, including the battle over Bitcoin's future, and what we believe is vital to ensure that the network thrives and survives after the mining block reward cuts in half next year, and the network has a shorter period of time to really grow in order to survive from a transactional point of view. He has decided to emerge. A lot of people don't believe he's Satoshi. A lot of people do believe he's Satoshi. They're less vocal, but they are out there. We are taking efforts, and Craig has been taking efforts, this is what led to some of these libel claims that are being pursued, to start setting the record straight. I think by this time next year, you're going to be in a completely different situation.
Well, I guess we'll see. On that note, I think let's turn to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Let's go to the first row here, the second row.
Thank you for being here. Quick question.
Sorry, if you could just wait for the mic, please.
All right. Again, thank you for being here. Quick question. Beyond the conjecture of social media or who created it and everything else, very fundamentally, when you look at blockchain or Bitcoin, how do you view diffusion given that there is no one global central bank? Excuse me. No one global central bank. So you wanted to make it the world currency. But how are you looking at it given all the political strife that we have?
If you start a ledger that is more effective and more efficient, then people will start using it. If you look at things like SWIFT and IBAN and whatever else, then they're used back then because they were the most efficient way of electronically settling. We hope to be far better. And effectively, blockchain becomes a commodity. It becomes an information commodity. So a number of people have written about the information sort of as an asset type things back from the 80s on. And that's what Bitcoin actually acts as. So as you use it, you save data. It becomes like a bureau services organization, but a distributed one. It becomes one where there's no need for audit or checks because it's all easily available. It enables a means of doing a single immutable ledger. Now, what people don't realize is throughout history, everyone's been able to cook the books. Even when you've had the set of books and it's on paper with pen, people have been able to have a second set. We now have a way of having regulators, government, whatever else, set what the key will be for the beginning of the year and have a private deterministic scheme where you can provably show every record follows so that someone can no longer have a second set of books. Now, over time, governments, at least I believe, honest governments, are going to outcompete ones that aren't. Corruption and a lack of governance come at a cost. So if you have corrupt companies, corrupt government competing with honest ones on a level playing field, I actually believe, the bit that no one seems to remember anymore, Adam Smith had a second book on moral sentiments. It's more important than the first. You can't understand the wealth of nations as Adam Smith wanted unless you read his book on moral sentiments. That's the first and the clearest aspect of this. If people have proper governance, if people have proper ways of recording information, if ownership of property is easy, then you have a system that can grow. So Bitcoin doesn't become the one money, the way people say. It becomes the one foundation. And different central banks can have their own currency and compete. So there still could be a euro, but a euro with a known limit, where people like the Greek sort of community would know well in advance of problems, where people can actually have valuation of assets because they're traded properly, not insured and unknown. That's the difference. I believe basically competition will allow this. I'm not going to stop other blockchains. I don't want them to call themselves Bitcoin if they're not Bitcoin. Let them compete. But the difference is we will grow faster, we will have more technology, and we will build.
Yeah, we don't believe Bitcoin is going to replace all the fiat currencies of the world. We believe it'll be the most universal world's new money, but all of the fiat currencies that exist today, the euro, the British pound, the US dollar will exist, and they may even operate as tokens or tokenized assets on the Bitcoin blockchain.
So how does that play then into monetary policy when you're looking at things like we're looking at the supply of money as it affects the inflation rates and everything else? So if you have all these other currencies going on, how are we really looking at it? I completely understand your point about having transparency across charts of accounts, things like that. How do you see it then if we're not, in your words, looking at it as a currency, but more a blockchain technology? Correct me if I'm an economist, not a techie, but if you start looking at it, how does it then affect, again, more or less our money supply and the other macroeconomic conditions?
Central banks need information. Right now, the issuing of bonds electronically is effectively a very blunt instrument. They need a scalpel and they have a hammer. What happens now is months after the event, they react. They base things on GDP, which is a tool, but used wrong. The example of Iceland, where people bought and sold the same assets to basically create wash value to increase the value of their banks so they could raise money from Germany and other places, is a perfect example. If you can then start tracing those assets and valuing them properly and knowing what the real assets are, that changes the scenario. So central banks will exist, but the difference is they'll be constrained. So in England, the bank used to actually be based on a gold standard, which constrained what would happen. And the real problem there was they changed after the war the value to basically prop up the value of the pound when it wasn't that high. So they should have been honest about it and should have devalued that when they went back to a gold standard. You don't get away from central banks being able to do that because central banks don't print money. We say print money. I've made that error, which it really is, in simplifying things down too far and saying to people, banks print money. They don't. They issue loans. And banks will be able to issue loans. But if the people in the country know what the loans are properly, that changes things. Right now, the US Fed has no idea how much money they have. They have no idea how much electronic money, how much paper money, how many bonds. They know somewhere between $2 and $13 trillion is missing from the economy. That's a big sort of nebulous whatever, and that's a lot of money. So if it's on the high end, that's a problem. What happens if some country like Russia or whatever owns that? They could flood it back. So what we need is better tools, and we need people able to manage and see those and understand what's happening in the economy, better than you get with GDP. Being able to actually record things, get government money and payments quicker. An example of things I've talked about and we've been doing IP on would be, for instance, allowing VAT to be paid instantly. So when you go into a shop, it just happens. Then you take away a whole audit and compliance risk. The shop owner no longer needs to worry about his taxes because it just happens. You don't need to worry about fraud because if you don't have the money, no one's going to take away the money and hide it and squirrel it away and try and defraud. It's just not there. If you take away sort of the opportunity, the fraud triangle goes away.
Hey, yeah, you talk about fake news, and I kind of agree to an extent, like especially a lot of crypto news is kind of nonsense. But Wired magazine in 2015, they supported your claim to be Satoshi. In fact, they're the ones who leaked it and originally kind of pinned you as Satoshi. But a month later, so in 2015, there were blog posts that were leaked that predated the Bitcoin white paper, which apparently you had written, in which you spoke about the upcoming release of Bitcoin. So it seemed like the leak basically confirmed that you had created it. But then Wired, a month later, said that a lot of those references had been backdated. So they looked through the archives, and I've seen the screenshots. They looked through the archives on the Wayback Machine, and it shows that a lot of old versions of those blog posts.
What's
actually
the earliest
didn't
date on
contain
those?
Sorry?
What is the earliest date?
The earliest date for what?
The archive.
The earliest date for the archive. I can't give you specifically what it is. But essentially, I'm basically saying Wired alleged, not me, Wired alleged that you had backdated a lot of those claims. And I'm asking, can you, because that to a lot of people kind of is a smoking gun.
So I've got referenced things that other people reference, meaning they exist, but they're going back to 2007. Yet you'll find nothing in the Wayback Machine before 2015. So the argument is there are multiple different versions of web pages that have existed. Yes, things have been turned off and whatever else. That doesn't mean they were backdated. That is because I didn't go out to Wired. Wired and Gizmodo were played by a Mr. Contrarian. Mr. Contrarian was sending documents that were stolen from my company, and contrary to what people, we didn't talk about our employees or whatever else. And as Jimmy knows, I mean, we had 45 staff in 2013. In the days when no one knew about Bitcoin, I had 45 staff in Australia working on Bitcoin projects, basically secretly under the radar. And I started talking to a number of people like Peter Todd and Greg Maxwell and Adam Back. And the next thing I know is I've got machines being hacked, I've got files being leaked, altered versions of records going out and around the world, and people putting out documents saying they're from me. This is why court matters. If someone tells you, I've got an email from Craig Wright, and it didn't come from me, and they haven't proved how they've gotten it, they don't have an email from Craig Wright. If they've got an email they said came from me, they don't have an email from me. That's why you have rules of evidence. It's called hearsay. If someone hands you a document, a PDF, a printout of an email and says, this came from Craig Wright, why do you believe that? Yet that's what people are doing right now. So this evidence is things that don't even get an initial look in court.
But there's a history of fabricated evidence created and is leaked to journalists or online that is difficult to sift through, and it's hard as a reader. It can be viewed on the Wayback Machine that a lot of the kind of references to stuff like cryptocurrency paper and triple entry accounting were added in 2013. You can see that on the Wayback Machine. That
no, you can't, because you don't see the original page. Show me the Wayback Machine 2008 entry.
I mean, do you want
to
me
be valid?
Now?
The 2008 entry of the page would have to be shown. It's not valid evidence. The original page has been deleted. It doesn't exist on the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
So and I can tell you, as a former lawyer who litigated many cases in the US, that courts of law don't accept Wayback Machine printouts as reliable evidence of what a website may or may not have looked like in the past, because they're not entirely reliable.
It's just that the date on the actual blog post says 2009. It says 2009.
No, what you'll find is the Wayback Machine
in January 2009.
So
and then 2013 it says there were stuff
I don't
entered and backdated.
You can choose to believe anything you see on a web page as true or not. I can choose to believe what I see on the archive. Which may or may not be true.
The archive from 2014
I don't know.
Doesn't have the 2008 page. There's no way back going beyond that.
2009 page, 2009 January.
Isn't saved.
It isn't saved?
No.
That was the one that was leaked in the Wired article.
Yes, there's altered pages from later.
So it's altered?
Okay, let's move on to the next topic.
By who? By Wired?
Sorry, I'm going to court on this. That simple. I don't need to face trolls in rooms. That's why we have evidence. So here's the thing. Evidence. We have courts. You know what happens when you lie in a court? You know the maximum penalty in this country for perjury? It's about 20 years. Great. I'm going to be in court. Prove it in court. You get to send me to jail for 20 years. I get to put my evidence, and other people get to put theirs. That's how real things work in the real world. Outside of this crypto shit sort of Twitter storm world where people sit there going, oh, Twitter matters. The real world, people have evidence and rules. People put documents out and get a chance to actually have them analysed properly. People in the real world, outside Twitter, Facebook, and fake news, get to actually say, I'm sorry, I didn't create that. Just because someone wrote my name on a PDF didn't mean it came from me. I don't know about you, but I find that as important. I find this whole world of 1,000 years of common law important. I don't think Coder's law is good. I think it is shit. I think Coder's law is the lowest attack on modern society, the biggest social justice warrior attack, trying to rip down everything we have good. It's really about taking away everything we've built over hundreds of years and going, oh, it's just white males. Well, it's not. I'm sorry, Western culture isn't white males. Augustus of Hippo was African. Sophio of Lesbos was female. And people understand that her poems about women were by a woman. That's Western culture. It isn't just a whole lot of guys in white, like for the last 50 years, bloody Harvard's been teaching us. It's a whole lot of different coloured people of different religions, different races, different everything else. And I'm not throwing Western culture away. I'm not throwing law away. I will do it in court where I will be held liable for my actions. Thank you.
I think that answers my question.
Thank you. So you mentioned limited scalability in your speech. So in terms of limited scalability and the constrained network that Bitcoin sometimes faces, especially at peak times, how can Bitcoin, or SV in this case, progress to rival, again, as you mentioned, Visa, MasterCard transaction limits, as opposed to other crypto altcoins such as like IOTA with Tangle, which I mean you could argue is like an advanced Bitcoin, an advanced blockchain type transaction.
I wouldn't argue it's a blockchain, sorry.
Well, it's more advanced than blockchain because it can process.
No, actually, it's a technology from the 90s that has been redone to pump something that is not worth shit. Basically, what you're doing is a DAG, effectively a graph that can rejoin. Now, what you're saying is multiple forms of information are more valuable. Now, the concept is we will have cost of putting these things out there, except you don't. So the attack on anything like IOTA is just to have a long enough chain. And people say, oh, but that would be too long because too many people. Except you don't need to have new coins to every person. It's only, if we have this room, I only need to scam these guys over here, and the rest can form. So there's a reason IOTA hasn't actually done anything or scaled or anything like that. It's because it can't. So everyone loves to hype it because that's getting them money. It's getting them quick money. They haven't actually created a solution. So what are we going to scale to? Well, next year, terabytes, then bigger. That simple. And I don't really care if people say not everyone can run a Raspberry Pi, because the whole concept here is, who cares? Equality sucks. And I'll say that one again, equality sucks. We're not equal. We have different abilities. Everyone shouldn't be equal. That's called Marxism. It failed. Give it up.
Oh, sorry,
let me address that a little more technically from what we're doing, Dr. Wright. Well, we're already doing a Bitcoin SV. The big untruth, the big lie that the world has been sold about Bitcoin for a lot of years is that Bitcoin cannot scale. And that is how the Bitcoin core supporters and development team sold the narrative that we have to have the Lightning Network because it's not safe to raise the block cap above a megabyte. And then Bitcoin Cash, when it emerged, raises to 32, and you could demonstrate that you could do even bigger blocks. But even the Bitcoin Cash developers, their lead developer, Maurice Sachet at ABC, is on video saying he doesn't want to advertise anything more than 32 megabyte blocks because you can't really do it. Well, with Bitcoin SV, we raised the block cap to 128 megabytes. We have seen on the network mine the world's largest ever blocks mined on a public blockchain of 113, then two 128 megabyte blocks. We have a scaling test network, which our team has launched, where we've just opened it for business recently, inviting businesses to actually test greater speed and transaction volume. And in July, as I mentioned, we're raising the block cap to 2 gigabytes on the path to 1 terabyte size blocks. So in terms of how we're doing it, technical improvements to the code, belief, and a team that's not afraid to challenge the scaling limits, because we also don't have a business agenda like the Bitcoin core people do to keep the chain not scaled so that I can move the transactions off of the chain to the Lightning Network because it serves the proprietary interests of the company that funds me.
Just to quickly, like the second part of the question was in terms of transaction fees, and do you think that your particular cryptocurrency would be more easily proliferated for microtransactions? Because that's one of the complaints about Bitcoin.
There'll always
Core.
be some that are zero.
What do you mean?
Transaction
Free.
fees, free.
Okay, so is that a yes?
Yes.
So free generally means people are happy to send little transactions.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's one of the reasons that Bitcoin Core is people say that it can't be proliferated as and used like as a general cryptocurrency for everything is because of the now transaction fees, networks, things like that.
Right.
If you put an artificial cap, what happens?
Yeah. Recently, for example, the Bitcoin Core network experienced congestion again with high transaction volume to a point where a few weeks ago I saw they were hitting like 80,000 unconfirmed transactions in their mempool, and it caused the transaction fees to start creeping up again. So it was costing, $8, $10 or more for some transaction fees just to send a single transaction across the network, right? Now, the average, I think I just checked it yesterday, was about $1.77 per transaction, but that's far too much, right, to create the world's money system. You're not going to spend a $1.77 in US dollars to do a single transaction to pay for something at the coffee shop, and certainly not to do microtransactions in the world we're envisioning, where Bitcoin payments can be used to power, access to your data, social media interactions. Those transaction fees either have to be really tiny or free, as Craig mentioned, fractions of a cent, right? And that's only possible if you have really big blocks to fit huge amounts of transactions in a block to keep the fees very low for any one transaction, and miners still make money because instead of just 1,000 transactions in a block, they might get 1 million transactions in a block, or 10 million, or one day 1 billion, and even if they only make a tiny, tiny fraction of a penny off of one transaction, they have so many, it accumulates into transaction fees for miners in order to sustain them to continue mining on the chain, to provide the security and computing power that will continue the chain in the network. It's tied to the mining health of the network. Understanding the economics is very important. That is what the other chains do not understand. If they move all the transactions off the chain, they will eventually kill the mining hash on the chain, because miners will not make money by continuing to mine on that chain in the future.
Just to pick up on something you mentioned, Craig, when you said that we should not all be equal, could you elaborate a bit more on that, please?
Certainly. We're not. Like it or not, we don't have the same IQs. We don't have the same educational background. Men and women are different. Like it or not, as a male, you're probably more likely to be stronger. As a female, you're more likely to have different social skills. Generally, the average woman is about 100 times more likely to not have Asperger's and not be a sort of social sort of outcast like most of my life I have been.
But to say you're clearly not a woman, Craig.
Definitely. Most of us have differences that we can exploit. And that's a good thing. Imagine an equal world. Everyone's exactly the same. That's rather boring.
How it relates to Bitcoin, what he means by that
Just
is about mining. About mining.
Before talking about how it relates to Bitcoin, don't you think that's sort of conflating being equal and being the same? Because I agree that having different IQs or the differences between men and women shows that we're not all the same. But equality, saying that we're not all equal, implies that some of those traits make people superior to others. So do you not think that it would be a more appropriate way to say that people are not all the same instead of saying that people are
superior?
Not all
Why is that a bad word? So in some ways, yes, we are. But the whole social justice bit means that's bad, except it's not. Some of us, in some things, are superior. Like it or not, you're all privileged. You are going to Oxford. That simple. You have something that most people in the world will never get. You have more behind you to start. And yet, most of you will probably be out sort of bid, compete, whatever else, by some guy who's probably from nothing. The average new billionaire, new, not inherited, generally comes from poverty. Shit poor, nothing. So both of those are scenarios where we're equal. And what we want in Bitcoin is competition. We want the best miners. So sitting there saying everyone should be able to have a go, why? What we're trying to do is build a global financial system. We're not trying to give everyone a go at running a miner. We're not trying to sit there going, everyone should have a chance to validate everyone's transactions. Why? Does it matter that you sit there and validate someone else's transactions and go, I feel empowered because I helped build Bitcoin. If you want to build Bitcoin, do something. Build a business, build an app, help protocol development. You don't need to run a Raspberry Pi and feel self-important about being part of the network to be important. You can actually teach people about it. You can write about it. You can create new laws to help people understand how Bitcoin fits in the existing framework. You can help banks understand how it can reduce costs. You can build new ledger formats to help clubs, churches, charities. And none of that because we're equal, because we're all different, because we all have different skills. If we all want to be equal and all do the same thing, nothing advances. Nothing at all. We go backwards. We advance because we're all different and we compete.
Because we're different, but not because we're unequal.
Because we are unequal. We are equal in law. There are two things, and this is where people love to conflate it using words. There are two polar opposites. Equality in law, equality in outcomes. You can't have one, both. You can have one or the other. If you have equality in law, then people always end up unequal in outcome. If you have equality in outcome, you have to take from people who are working harder and give from people who don't work to them. So make that choice. What do you want? Do you want everyone equally poor, because that's the only way you have equal outcome? Or do you want everyone having an equal opportunity in law? The equal ability to go to a court, the equal ability to own property. They're not the same.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions, but please join me in thanking Craig and Jimmy for coming today.